So if a well-bred, purebred will typically go back to the breeder if it needs to be rehomed. That explains why there are so few really beautiful and well-behaved pure breeds in shelters. They're just like really, really rare. Typically, what you find in shelters are mixed breeds. Where are all these mixed breeds coming from? That's the question. So there are three places that the mixed breed. Well, nope, I'll say three. Okay. Um, some people will mix two breeds because that's what they have. They happen to get two affordable dogs. Most likely not AKC registered because they usually come with a spay neuter contract that at least encourages them to get the dogs spayed and neutered, although it's quite easy to get away with not. And then you have an oops litter, or or maybe it was actually kind of planned, but you want to say it was an oops litter because it's kind of looked down on, but you wanted them to have puppies. So there's quite a few dogs. A very popular mix is huskies and bullies, because I'll break it down for you. There are some dogs that have a high appeal to a certain socioeconomic status and a certain personality or type of dog. And we kind of know this by instinct that, when we see a big, muscular, intimidating dog, we expect it to be owned by, I don't know, maybe a big, muscular, intimidating guy. It just kind of goes together, although there are definitely exceptions. It seems to be true. And then your little floofy, Chinese crested dogs with the little poofy poofy hair, or the poodles that get all like poofed out and special grooming. We kind of expect them to be owned by, wealthy older ladies. And of course, not always true, but there's something that kind of fits. And so the largest group of people who own dogs, if we could group them all together, not by gender, but by socioeconomic status, it seems to be the biggest thing that kind of you can group people together. And that covers a wide age range and a wide range of ethnicities, although a little heavier on the a lower wow, sorry, my train of thought. More diverse ethnicities in the lower socioeconomic status than are in the wealthier, upper class. And that's just because, they've more recently come over, and so they've had less time to build wealth. It really does take time and extra talents to be able to escape from poverty, which is kind of like, poverty is kind of like a trap. It's like a whirlpool, a current that's pulling you down. There's a whole lot of forces that keep a person pulled down back into poverty that are hard to escape from, and you have to be extraordinarily talented and strong and resourceful to escape. And those who do, they might build a lot of wealth in one generation, but sometimes it takes several generations to kind of like, okay, the first generation just works really hard, gives the second generation a boost up, and the next generation can really, go to college and start building wealth. But all that really depends on, the state of the economy and different things that are a lot of out of our control. What happens in the world conflict of wars and stuff really has an impact on the economy. So I'm saying all this to point out that the largest grouping of people that have the most in common is based on a lower socioeconomic status. And I'm not going to give you numbers of where it starts and finishes. Like, you've got the poverty level where they almost can't afford to have very many dogs or pets. when they do, it's usually temporary because, okay, we've got more money, we can afford a pet, but they lose the money and they have to give the pet up. And that cycle kind of can repeat itself over and over again. Poverty is a huge, it is pretty much the biggest reason why anyone feels the need to rehome a pet is finances. And so it's not surprising that homes that the wealthier homes are more secure, and so that they can spend more money on the dogs that they purchase. So they tend to purchase the more expensive breeds, and they more often keep those dogs rather than having to rehome them. Even if the dog ends up being a massive headache, they can hire trainers, they can hire dog walkers, they can send the dog to doggy daycare. I mean, some people like their dogs spend very little time with them at all, but they just kind of have them. Sometimes it's kind of a status symbol. Sometimes it's just this belief that it's just what you do. You get married and you have kids and you get a dog. Not really something people think about is, do I really enjoy this? So this is why more of the dogs that end up in shelters and pounds have come from the lower class. And the lower class usually doesn't spend as much money on the dogs that they get. They tend to get, I'm going to use the term knockoff. I hope it's not offensive, but a dog that isn't really bred to the standard, and the standard includes a really good temperament. If they just kind of like breed any dog that kind of looks, okay, this looks like a German Shepherd, this dog looks like a German Shepherd, we're going to breed them together and we're going to have German Shepherd puppies. A lot of people will get these because they're, $1,500. You can afford that instead of, I don't know, like maybe a well-bred German Shepherd. I haven't looked, but they might be more like $4,000 or $5,000 if they have like champion parents and stuff. And these should actually be considered different breeds because of how different they can look and act. Like a trained eye can see the difference between a well-bred dog and a really poorly bred dog. So the majority of the dogs are adopted by and owned by, and then eventually, usually, rehomed by the lower class. And there's more lower class than upper class. That's just the spread of income in the United States. I'm not even going to speak about anything on a global level because I have no idea, but this is my observation. And so the demand for new dogs is constantly there because, they lost income, they had to give up their dog. They moved, they had to give up their dog because they couldn't afford to rent a place that had higher rent because they have dogs or whatever. Or they find out that there's breed restrictions. They adopted a bully. They can't find a place that'll even, rent to someone with a bully. And often it's a renting problem because if you own your house, you can have, whatever dogs you want to. But those who rent are usually in the lower class and they have a harder time. And they move more often because of jobs, and you just kind of have to follow the work wherever it is. And so those are the at-risk dogs, is the ones that are in the range of more like, a couple hundred to just, maybe up to 2,000. These are the dogs that are at the greatest risk. And because there's a constant demand for new puppies. And this is also an attitude that is pervasive in the culture, is it's not thought that you purchase this really expensive dog and then you send it to a trainer and you go to classes and you learn how to train this dog, and then you take this dog with you and do like expensive type of activities, whether it's, okay, they go to doggy daycare for, enrichment, and you might send them to a summer camp, or do agility, like join an agility, what do they call them? They're almost like gyms for dogs. Like you go to the gym and then you take your dog and you go dock diving, or weight pulling, or barn hunting. There's like, I can tell you a list of like tons of activities that people can do with their animals. It's becoming more popular amongst the lower class, but it started as a very elite thing to go to dog shows, to show your dog, to train your dog to do tricks. To have like a spoiled, well-kept dog is a very wealthy thing. It's an added expense that's a luxury. And people in the lower class also want that, that they want something that's accessible for them, but they don't have the time or the money to actually provide that life for the dog. So they end up getting a dog that ends up being neglected in a yard by itself because they're working, or when they come home from work, they're so exhausted they can't really take the dog out. There's a lot of addiction and mood disorders and abuse in lower incomes, which then gets turned on the dogs. And so there's more abused dogs. Of course, the culture in the very, ghetto areas is dog fighting, and that's still very much a thing. And so a lot of the dogs that end up in the pounds and the rescues are these really poorly bred mixes or purebred knockoffs. It's like, oh, there's a German Shepherd, but look at it. It's obviously not a well-bred one. It's neurotic, or a lab. You see labs all the time. You see, I've seen golden retrievers, I've seen Aussies and stuff in the pound, but these are, the poorly bred ones. And so you can almost tell by looking at them that their temperament is just not there. They're not handling stress well. And that's something that a breeder does by incredibly careful, well thought planning and selection to create really solid dogs that can handle stress and it doesn't break them. Okay. So a poorly bred dog will break down from stress and become reactive or aggressive. So it's not a dog breeding problem. It's the people who are breeding the dogs that are the problem. And the people who are breeding the dogs that create the problems are the breeders that are breeding low quality dogs. And the buyers who are contributing to this problem are the people who can afford low quality dogs. So how do you solve this problem? It is a completely independent problem from people who purchase expensive, high quality dogs and those who breed high quality dogs. So therefore, the slogan "Adopt, Don't Shop" should really be edited and altered to say adopt or shop responsibly. And responsibly is buying a dog that was well bred, regardless of the price. If you have to pay $5,000 to get a good quality, golden retriever, if you want a golden retriever that acts like a golden retriever, that's not aggressive, that's really friendly and easygoing, that's not going to get cancer at a young age and hip dysplasia and arthritis, that's not going to, be obsessive and neurotic and barking and out of control energy. Like, you have to invest, probably think of the initial budget you want to spend on your dog and just double it. And what does that mean? It just means you have to wait a little longer to buy the dog you want instead of just buying the first dog you kind of think you can afford. Okay, so that's major, that is both advice for, thinking about buying a puppy, but also I'm talking about the problem of dog overpopulation and where that comes from, and if it does indeed come from dog breeding in general. So adopt, don't shop. I also want to point out that now, if we really took that to its full extent, we would say that if all breeders would stop breeding let's make a law. In fact, we could make a law that bans breeding until all the dogs that are in shelters are adopted. First of all, only those who already kind of have high ethics and follow the law would obey that. And it would push those who are willing to break the law already, and are willing to cut corners ethically for the sake of money. It would push them underground and create a black market. Anytime you create a black market, you create a higher demand for things that are illegal, and you put more give it more value. So that means more criminals will be purchasing dogs for illegal reasons, and those will end up in shelters. So it won't actually solve the problem. There will be fewer dogs to adopt secondhand, but the dogs that will be available will be more aggressive to the point where the euthanasia rates would have to go way up. So fewer dogs, but euthanasia rates would go way up, and there would be fewer of these secondhand dogs to adopt, and then there would be a shortage of well-bred dogs. If they spay and neuter, all the dogs that come into the rescues, the new dogs have to come from somewhere. Do we want them coming from the disreputable people who are willing to disregard what's best for the dog? Those are the ones that will continue breeding regardless of the law. And the really good quality breeders would stop breeding, and then there would be no more well-tempered, healthy, beautiful dogs that are just to their purebred standard. And so it's not, if you want to legislate it, it would have to be something that could be reinforced very practically on a widespread level, and there would have to be a lot of fines and fees that can be collected to make dog breeding very expensive and very what's the word? Impractical, for someone to do. If you have enough legal things that prevent someone from just easily breeding dogs, fewer people will do it. Fewer people will have accidental litters. And I actually wrote up a proposal, and I presented it to the Anchorage Animal Care and Control, because I'm not a very political person, and I don't like spending my time on trying to fix a system that I feel like is way too far gone broken. But this is an issue. I believe it is at the point where there needs to be legislation, because we make legislation when the majority can no longer be entrusted to do the right thing for the right reasons. They have to be required to. For instance, littering, and polluting, killing endangered wildlife. These are just a few of the things that come to mind that people should not have to be told that they, can't do. But if they cared enough, if they had enough empathy and love for others, they wouldn't do those selfish things. There wouldn't be any need for really any laws. So laws are put in place when there are enough selfish people doing selfish things that it's just not acceptable anymore. And I feel that there has been very little progress in animal rights movements, because animal rights activists that are willing to lobby and put in the time, they're a little bit too far gone, a little too crazy, and they want to give animals the same rights as humans, which I think is problematic in a lot of ways. But if they simply made made laws that, okay, these are the bare minimum requirements of being able to breed a dog. They have to have temperament tests to make sure that they're not breeding aggressive dogs. Like, if we could get rid of dog aggression in all the breeds, like, there would be so much less issues. A lot of the issues with dogs are that they can't coexist peacefully with, the public. That makes a dog a big liability. And that's kind of the thing you think first when you see a dog. Is that a nice dog, or is that a aggressive dog? Like, it should be the first thing you think, because it makes a big impact on how that dog is going to react to you or to your dog. Okay, so we just covered, sorry, my ADHD is like, I get distracted very easily. So we were just talking about the issue with legislating. If dog breeding was legislated, then we could really reduce the number of poorly bred dogs. So I believe this is a solution, and that rescues will never be the solution. I envision it like this: if you had a little cut, you could use a Band-Aid, and that thing would heal all on its own. Um, this is not. This used to be a little cut situation, many years ago, when there were fewer dogs being bred and fewer poor people buying and then getting rid of and buying more dogs, and ruining the dogs that they had because they don't spend time. They don't really have time or energy or interest in, making sure their dog is the best. And I realize I'm making sweeping generalizations, and there are obviously exceptions, but I'm not a classist because I actually come from poverty. Like, I've been poor my whole life. I've scraped and struggled my whole life, and I have rehomed my share of animals, some for financial reasons. So this is an issue that I see with lack of resources and lack of there's a lack of a safety net that makes it very difficult. And so that's why I have a heart for this issue, is because I see it as an issue of the majority in the United States. Okay, this is impacting the majority of people who want to own dogs. So circling back around, just a refresher what I was covering. Wow, completely lost it. Dog legislation to protect dogs. It's probably not going to happen. There was a law in 2019 being reviewed by a committee to see if it would go on to Congress, and it didn't pass. It had a very low likelihood of passing, and I scanned the introduction to it, not all the details, but it didn't cover the financial proposal to actually enforce it, which I feel like that's a big flaw to any proposed legislation. Is there needs to be a financial plan in place to reinforce, and not just like, oh, we'll raise taxes. Like, that's not a solution for everything. So where's the money going to come from? And the way I worked it out is figure out how much it will cost to reinforce, like to track dog breeders and legislate websites, because most of these people are selling dogs. They're not taking the dogs to the grocery store in a box, and selling them for $1,000. No, they're posting them on websites. And so this is something that is on the public domain that could be you can't sell, for example, you can't sell firearms on certain websites. Facebook doesn't allow the sale of animals or firearms, and there are ways to get around it, but Facebook is constantly improving their methods to find and shut down ways. And so that's really where it needs to be regulated, is in the it's the advertising methods that breeders use to let people know that they have dogs available. And if you start monitoring that, just like they monitor, you know, what's the word? Human trafficking, and they're what's the word? They're able to kind of track down people by their online activity. So that's how far it would have to go. And so if we can't do that, we're fighting a unsolvable problem. You're bailing water out of a sinking ship. And so if all your focus is like, okay, let's bail out water, we got to keep doing it, but each moment that goes by, more water comes in, then you're bailing out. I feel like that's the situation right now with the rescue situation, because this last year, more people adopted dogs than I think at any other time. I'm not sure if those statistics are, were being collected by someone officially, but it's just an observation that everyone in the dog breeding world will say that yes, the demand went up, their prices went up dramatically. There was a shortage of dogs available, and some of the shelters were literally emptied out during COVID. Okay, so the prediction models were like, oh my gosh, the demand for dogs is going way up. But then, and I predicted this. I'm like, well, all these people who adopted dogs, as soon as they go back to work, and they don't have time. This is what people always say. It's like, I don't have time anymore. It's like, how much time did you have when you adopted the dog, and why did you think that would continue for the rest of that dog's life? Oftentimes, it's a temporary type of a situation, like staying home from work because of you're in quarantine. Why would they think that that would continue for the life of the dog? And why would anyone rationalize like getting? Oftentimes, people are like, oh, we'll have more time to spend training it, but that really doesn't happen most of the time. It is an intention that people have, like, and this is really common, like people have good intentions. Oh, I'll walk the dog every day or whatever, but people who are in the lower economic status struggle with limited resources. It's either limited money, to hire professionals, limited time, because you're working to pay the bills, or limited energy because you're just exhausted from overworking and never really having enough. And that is actually, poor health is actually one of the reasons why people stay poor, is they just don't have the energy to be these super heroes with just accomplishing major stuff. They're just really really tired and sick and not well. So man, I identify those are my people struggling through life, and it's very, very hard. And like animals are such a comfort to people. There's like, and in fact, because of the increased incidence of mental illness, the mood disorders, this autism spectrum is higher in the underprivileged. That it actually creates more of a need for animals as emotional support, but less of an ability to provide the needs for that animal. So like they often need animals that are just there to be able to cuddle with them and comfort with them, but comfort them and cuddle with them, but not be like, oh, okay, let's go running. Like most of these people do not exercise for enjoyment. And again, I know I'm making sweeping generalizations, but you really have to, when you're studying statistics, you have to study what are these qualities that make people similar in this group, and what are their behaviors. And so trying to understand the motives and everything helps us understand the problem better. So we have to make generalizations, and it shouldn't be offensive when we say most. Okay, yes, there are exceptions. If all the people aren't like this, then a lot of exceptions. That's okay. But let's see. Where was my train of thought? A text comes in or I get some notification and I'm just like out the window. So yeah, there is no way to resolve this problem, because it's not like the government's going to be like, okay, we're going to give you your monthly ration of food, and you got your housing covered, and here's your pet allowance. Like that's just a little too much. The government might end up providing a basic living wage for everyone eventually, if that's the direction this country goes. But I guarantee they're never going to be at the point where like, okay, and you get a mansion and here's all of the animals you want. And it's like there is no limit to the number of animals that I would enjoy having if I could afford to care for them all. Like I would have a zoo. I would have like all these beautiful, but you know what? You can't even, it's a very irrational, insatiable need, and that's why I call it an addiction. I have an animal addiction. I don't know of any support groups for animal addicts, but I do know a lot of animal addicts, and they're often breeders, because breeding gives you this ability to constantly have an influx of animals, but you do have to have less of an attachment because you can't keep them all. And some of them have, they got a pack of 20 dogs because they're all in their breeding program. And it gives them an excuse because it helps offset some of the cost of having all those dogs. They couldn't afford all the dogs without breeding. But yeah, more animal addicts go into breeding than anything else. So that's one reason. And just like any addiction is more prevalent in the underprivileged because they can't afford the treatments. They can't afford the health lifestyle. Their genetics are often the reason why they are in a generational poverty cycle. Is they have disabilities, whether mentally, emotionally, or physically, that keep them kind of set back from achievements. And so they are more likely to want to get into breeding and to want to have many more animals than they can afford. And I am absolutely guilty of that. Anyone who knows me knows I admit freely that I'm an animal addict and I don't have a lot of self-control there. If I could make an endless amount of money, I probably would just spend it all on animals and making them an awesome life for them. I just want to I love making my animals happy. It makes me happy, and I feel like it's really similar to what people want to do when they spoil their kids and they have all these amazing things that they do for their kids. I don't have any of that. I want my kids to be happy and healthy, but a simple life is definitely best. And I think that they, really enjoy having all the animals around, but maybe not as many as I have. So that was just basically this video. I know I'm rambling, but just looking at the big picture of why there is a pet dog, specifically dog overpopulation problem, and how that problem is never going to go away without severe legislation, because all the elements that feed into this cycle are in place and they just cannot continue. And no matter how much you preach adopt, don't shop, people think when they buy a dog off of Craigslist that's an oops litter that they're rescuing. And people think, okay, you did something wonderful when you rescued this mix, but it came from a backyard breeder who, they sold the rest of puppies. They had a few left that they couldn't sell. They gave them to the rescue. Those are, those came from a backyard breeder just as much as if you had gone directly to them. But they went through a rescue instead. So rescues facilitate people being irresponsible. And the whole point of it is they want to make it zero consequence, zero shame. They don't want to shame people for surrendering an oops litter, because then people wouldn't do it. They would sell them themselves unspayed and unneutered. Those dogs would continue to have potential for producing more dogs. So they want backyard breeders. They want people having oops litters to surrender their dogs. And they are really doing a good job of spaying and neutering. That's improving a lot. But there is always going to be a demand for people selling their dogs directly to the public unspayed and unneutered. And those people not having the money or the commitment to keep their dogs from getting pregnant, and it's also this kind of a lack of ethics, lower sense of moral obligation that tends to be a little more common in the underprivileged, which I think just comes from a normalization of it. It's like you just see it happening and it's like, okay, well, all these other people are doing it, it can't be that bad. It's not illegal. It's like, it's my right. And so there's just a lot of rationalization. But yeah, I think that's it for now. I'll have to gather my thoughts and figure out what direction I want to go in next.